welcome back. We are preparing ourselves for one final mission to send to Eve for the moment, and then we will actually get to the planet. But there's a couple more things I'd like to show you first. To start with, I earned a bit more science by doing some mission control missions, and I have gained both of the probe pieces that I wanted to get. So now we have all of the probe pieces that we can get in the game. So we're progressing quite along, and we haven't really even explored the first planet yet. Truth be told, we're probably going to get the entire tech tree before by the time we're finished at Eve. Um, which is okay, I guess. Maybe to spice things up in the future, we'll be adding some more mods. But nonetheless, let me show you the build. Okay, so feast your eyes on this, baby. This... Maybe I should zoom out a bit so you can see what you're looking at. This is our mission to Eve. Everything that you see here is dedicated to landing technology on the surface of a new planet. This is a rather large build, needless to say. So let's take a look at the whole thing and then I'll explain the bits one at a time. To begin with, we have this upper stage right here, which is a jet plane. Now, you might be thinking, right, there are jets in the game. I've never gone over that before. Well, let me show you what this thing can do. Okay, so here's the jet lighthouse in action. Jets work a bit differently than the normal propulsion systems do with liquid fuel. You need a couple of parts. For example, you need these jet engines, usually at the back of whatever you're thrusting from. Think of them sort of like thrusters. And we also need some air intakes. Air intake is where air feeds into, because we need that to power our engines, because that's what the engines push out. And I believe you need liquid fuel too, I'm not entirely sure, but I notice that when I fly I tend to lose liquid fuel, so I think it's important in some aspect. Anyway, why don't we give this a try? Otherwise it's pretty much an ordinary launch. We'll start with no thrust, and activate our engines. You can already hear them humming, which is a really nice sound to hear. Let us proceed into the air. By throttling all the way up, the air intake starts to pull up some air, and we start to fly upwards. And there we go. Not exactly an aircraft, mind you, but pretty straightforward. I can steer this thing, and because I put some fins in here, some controlling fins, we should be able to operate this thing fairly reasonably. I'll admit I'm not too familiar with aircraft, so this is a little bit new to me. But the idea is, with this craft, is that we can fly to basically anywhere. In this case, it really only works on Kerbal, Kerbin, and one other place in the solar system we have yet to visit, and it's not Eve. But one of the missions requires that we use these, let's see here, jet engines. So we want to take one of these to Eve, and I figured, while we're at it, why not just design a plane? And we can use liquid fuel to fuel our trajectory there instead. Anyway, let's try some steering on this. Now, I'll admit, I'm not really the best at this sort of thing. Oh, there we go. Never mind, we're aborting this. I didn't really design this with the intent to steer too well. It's more or less designed to go in a straight line, which may not be the best plan for this. And now we've entered a kind of unstable, tumbling, rolling thing here. So I am going to play it safe. We're not going to get above the clouds quite today. Instead, we're just going to deploy our parachutes and drift back down to safety. Now, even though our parachutes are still up, we're still spiraling, which is not really good. I want to make sure that at the very least we are upright, or that my node right here is focused in the upper blue area, because if our node, or rather not the node, but the piece right down there, the nav wheel is in the blue, because if it's in the yellow, or rather orange, we'll wind up toppling over upside down. But in this case, because we were in the blue, we've committed to a safe landing. So, not really the best design, but by using jets, you don't have to use rocket fuel. Jets take substantially less fuel to power, and they don't require any oxidizer at all. If your rocket is substantially heavier than an ordinary thing is, you'll notice that we're falling at about 6 meters per second. We can improve upon that speed and fall at a slower, safer speed. So let's see if I turn the jet engines back on. And I wanted to fall somewhere closer to like 5 meters or 4 meters per second. We can use the jets down here to soften our landing. Yeah, about 4 meters per second is pretty good. There, now we just have to turn off our jet engines, and we've made it. So, this specific design is intended to land in the oceans of Eve. We're going to be carrying a bit less fuel and stuff here when we actually attempt to land on Eve, and that's because of the fact that we can't work, this won't work on Eve. The reason why is because jet engines require an atmosphere with oxygen. Kerbal, or rather Kerbin, is one of 2 places in the entire solar system that has oxygen. So it may seem like a bit of a waste to try to design things that run on jet fuel, because quite frankly, only 2 places out of 4 of them actually work. But nonetheless, the scientific mission here stipulates that we need to test a splashdown on Eve with our jet engines. I don't know why anybody wants that, but that's the other thing that they want. The second part of the mission at Eve is to test some stack decouplers, which are these bits here that I have in the center. They look like sewer grates. The idea is that when we land in the ocean, I will, first of all, I'll make sure that that we're throttled all the way down. I'll test that real quick, and then shut down the engine. So that's what we'll do. That's the first phase. And then the second phase is to make those fly off and explode. And then we will have performed all the missions that we want to do at Eve. This craft is also designed to be reusable on the surface of Kerbin. Or rather, I'll push the 3 button because I've assigned all of my ladders to 3. We've got them on both sides, and the idea is that we can actually take our astronaut out of the doorway here, and he can walk on the lower parts of this like a platform. And if I were, let's see, if I were careful enough and if I really wanted to do it again, I could repack the parachutes. And then, since we have a ton of fuel, we could actually go back up into the air and perform multiple landings. So, on the surface of Kerbal, this is a pretty efficient system. So that's more or less the gist of this. This is the jet rocket that we'll be taking with us to the planet Eve. We won't be flying it around, unfortunately, but we will land it there. And moving right along, after the jet plane beneath it, we have this sort of hub right here. This hub has some monopropellant fuel tanks and a larger fuel tank right here. We've connected probes to the sides rather awkwardly. I'm not sure if you can see them through this whole mesh of chaotic struts because this thing is incredibly unstable. But there are probes on either side of this. We only need 1, but I added 2 for symmetry. And you may notice that on the outside of this, we have some cars. They look like cars. They're actually going to be Eve rovers, and we're going to be landing those on the surface of the planet as well. These rovers use larger wheels, probably larger than most wheels in the game, and that's because we have a fairly large build here. There's some smaller wheels that you can attach to smaller probes, but because the gravity on Eve is rather significant, and because we have a rather large car here, we will be driving this on the surface of Eve. Since we're sending 2 of them, the goal is to land them on opposite sides of the planet, or roughly opposite sides of the planet, and then cover as much ground as we can. There's a similar project that's done in real life right now that's happening on Mars instead, called the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, or the Mars Exploration rovers. They're fairly popular, and they've been around for about 10 years, and they still work just fine. Anyway, I am controlling using the WASD controls. Oddly enough, I don't know why exactly, but the controls are inverted, meaning that if I push the S button, or the bottom button, I actually accelerate forwards, and the opposite seems to be true when I press the W button. Fortunately, this is pretty straightforward otherwise. As long as you're not going too fast when you hit something that's not flat on the surface, you can pretty much handle it. The B button is the brakes, so if I were to push down the B button, I could brake our craft. I want to do it gradually, because I'm worried that if I slam the brakes too hard, we'll actually fly forwards. So gradually, make sure that you leave plenty of room for yourself to slow down, and eventually, if I hold down the B button long enough, we will stop. Now, if I let go of the B button, the problem is that the system will gradually roll forward or backwards depending on the terrain, and that's because of the fact that most surfaces that we'll be landing on are not perfectly flat. We can remedy this, however, and it's a very simple option. If we push up here, there's the brakes button right beneath the landing gear button. It's this orange one right here. If I click it, it'll toggle the brakes to stay on or off, sort of like a parking brake. So if I leave that braked, that means that we're not going to go anywhere, and we'll ensure that we don't topple over or flop around or anything. The rover is equipped with all the science that we are capable of bringing with it, including our standard fare here. We've got a new pressure analysis cone. which I think are designed for the front of planes, which is kind of silly that we have to bring it with us, but whatever. We've got our Science Juniors and our Mystery goes over here, so the whole suite. It's even designed to house a Kerbal in it, and if you push the 3 button, or if I right-click it, we can actually lower down a ladder, which is important because if we fail to do that when we're out at somewhere, we're basically not going to be able to get back into the craft. So always make sure to lower your ladders before you leave. So as you can see, this car is huge compared to us. I'm not even sure what to compare it to in real life. A tank? I don't know. It feels small when you're controlling it, but when you're outside of it, it feels massive. And that's more or less the general gist of this craft. Um, and it runs on solar. By the way, it doesn't require fuel to run. It just requires electricity. So as long as our solar panels can get some form of electricity, we'll always be able to drive these things. Granted, we don't crash or topple upside down or something. And that's more or less the gist of it. We're going to be landing 2 of these on Eve, and we're going to be sending them to the planet shortly. So that's basically that. So, needless to say, we've got a lot on its way to Eve. Everything below it is dedicated to getting us there. We're going to be using a whole bunch of different rockets to get us there, including these solid rocket boosters, these larger mainsail ones, and then our super handy-dandy... I don't even know what these are called. Let's take a look. Kerbodyne KR2L Advanced Engine. Yes, whatever that means, we are going to be using those to achieve a journey to Eve. Now then, yeah, I've designed these with the intent, or rather with the purpose that they can accommodate Kerbals. So let's talk Kerbals for a bit. We have some Kerbals here. Some of them. We've got some more back in the lounge, but I'm not sure if we're going to be using them. I would like to poll you, the audience. Let me start by saying that Eve is a very, very dangerous place to land on for Kerbals. It's very easy to land there, but the problem is that it's very, very difficult to get something off of the surface of the planet because of its extreme gravity and because of its immense atmosphere. So basically, most things that we're going to be sending down to the surface of Eve are going to stay there for the remainder of their existence. So, that raises an ethical question. Do we want to send Kerbals down? Because if they get down there, they're not going to be able to come back up. Especially the ones that land in the water. I'll have no way to land any sort of rescue mission in water. So, this is where we face our biggest challenge. Do we want to send Kerbals to Eve? Yes or no? If we choose to, we can send up to 3. We can put 1 in the lighthouse up here, and we can put another 2 in the rovers. They might have plenty of things to explore, especially the ones who go into the rovers, but they'll never be able to return to Kerbal again. Do we want to do that? Is the scientific gain that we can get from that really worth it? So, I'll pose that to you, the viewers. We'll do it by vote. And if you guys really want me to send Kerbals out to land, then that's what I'll do. The power is yours, Mission Control. Oh, and one more thing before I forget. You may be wondering how I'm going to land all these pieces without trying to crash the entire rocket onto the planet. Well, I'm going to be sending this in segments. After we get into orbit around Eve, we're going to be detaching these pieces one at a time. First of all, the lighthouse will go on its own. It can do so because it has some monopropellant fuel tanks. Even though it doesn't have thrusters, we can use the monopropellant fuel tanks to make subtle adjustments to a trajectory so that it lands safely on the surface, or at least in the water. The intention is to have this thing land in the water. Beneath that, we'll have a couple more things remaining in orbit, including the 2 rovers and this hub piece. The hub piece itself is also a lander too. The reason why is because one of the mission statements here requests that we land on the surface of Eve and test the separatrons. That would be this guy right here that we have highlighted just beneath this the satellite dish. In the interest of making sure that we don't put separatrons on the rovers, because the rovers will be launched upwards and possibly crash, I've decided to make a brand new lander altogether and land it on the surface. So technically, we're actually going to have like a total of, let's see, honestly 4 new landings here. Although the middle piece is not really going to do that much once it arrives after tests. Maybe I can put some science pieces on this. It doesn't really matter, but maybe in the event to make it all a bit more worthwhile, I'll put some science on here. That just seems like the right thing to do. If we're going to be landing something on the surface of the planet, we should at least conduct a little bit more science for what it's worth. This craft is intended to land upright, meaning that it's going to land down here on its bottom. And these thrusters that we put on either side of the Separatrons are designed to push it back up. Perhaps in the interest of ensuring that this doesn't go spinning off in some direction and explode and break, I'm going to do one more final tune adjustment here. And I'm going to grab this, making sure that we have 2 for symmetry, and tilt it so that actually, you know what? Oh, this is quite a conundrum, because I'm worried that if I tilt it upwards, it'll break some of the scientific instruments that are above it, like the satellite dish. Although, come to think about it, the parachute and the satellite dish aren't really going to be important once we land on the surface. Oh, but the solar panel is. Never mind, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm being fickle, and that is a thing I should not be doing. So let me do some more fine-tuned adjustments here, and that's basically going to be it. So in the next episode, we are going to be doing one final launch, or at least one final launch for a long time, to get to Eve and its moon, Gilly. This craft will be on its way very soon. As soon as the results come in for the vote. I'm not going to launch it right away. So, those of you in the comments, please feel free to tell me what you think. Should we put Kerbals on it and sentence them to a life of exploration on the planet Eve? Or should we do unmanned science at the risk of less return? We'll find out in the next episode. So until then, everybody, stay tuned and good night.